Thanks for having me here today. So indeed, as Aina mentioned, I work at the Université Libre de Bruxelles. In Belgium, I also work at the University of Antwerp. But some of the work that I will present was actually developed at the Ghent University, which is where I worked before. So when I did my PhD was on serious games for healthy lifestyle promotion. And at the time, we also developed a serious game ourselves on cyberbullying. And we were very optimistic and we thought we were very creative. So some sunny afternoon, just the colleagues sat together and developed the dialogue and the storyline, and we thought we were doing great. But then it was implemented in the game, and we thought, no way, we ourselves would not even play it. So we realized that it was very important to get the fun, the entertainment features right, and we saw the potential of having entertainment techniques to increase user engagement. If we want people to use our tools, we need to make sure that they're attractive. So as already mentioned also by Nikos, we know that digital tools can be effective for healthy lifestyle promotion, that there are variations in effect sizes between studies and also between populations. And that one of the conditions for a tool to be effective is that there is sufficient user engagement, either objective engagement in terms of usage, in terms of adherence, but also subjective or experiential engagement in terms of attention, interest, positive affect, immersion, and so on. And that this is actually a challenge for digital interventions where there is no face-to-face support, where there's no encouragement, no live encouragement, and that actually there are certain approaches, certain techniques that can help us increase this user engagement, such as including reminders, monitoring, notifications, but also things like entertainment features, such as gamification. And so this is the focus of my talk today. I'd like to talk about three cases, three projects we did, or that my colleagues did, where we included entertainment features to try and increase user engagement. So I will not be talking much about the efficacy of the tools, but some of those things have been published already. I'll focus mostly on the user engagement. And so first project I'll talk about is the #LifeGoals app that included a daily drama, a little soap series, and automated chatbot. A second one is the Smart Life exergame. And the third one is the use of humor in health promotion. So the first project I want to talk about is the #LifeGoals, which was conducted at Ghent University in collaboration with Geert Combe and Greet Cardon. And most of the insights that we have in this project are actually thanks to the two PhD students on the project, Carmen Peuters and Laura Maanhout. And so what was #LifeGoals about? It was an intervention to promote mental health via the encouragement of healthy lifestyles. So we know that physical activity, low sedentary behavior, healthy diet, and sufficient sleep duration can have a positive impact on our mental health. So we developed an app for young adolescents to promote their mental health via these healthy lifestyles. It was also marketed or communicated to the adolescents as a healthy lifestyle app and not as a mental health app. It was intended as a mental health promotion tool, not as a prevention tool, for example, for kids who are at risk of poor mental health. And so we aimed this at 12 to 15-year-olds, which is the age where half of mental health problems first occur. So it was a self-regulation app focusing on these 4 health behaviors, and the kids could choose which of these behaviors they wanted to work on. And so the self-regulation part was intended to help them translate their positive intentions into behavior. We also wanted to reach adolescents who might not have a positive intention yet, who might not be motivated to work on one of these health behaviors. And so we did this via a narrative, so a mini-series, kind of a daily drama soap series style, and included a chatbot for sustained engagement for social support, as we saw that this kind of encouragement and support is often a problem in digital interventions. The app was developed fully in participatory design, so followed a lot of phases, and it's maybe a bit of not doing justice to all the work of the PhD students that I put this on half a slide here, because this took nearly 2 years to do, so it doesn't really do it credit. But just for sake of time, I'm trying to summarize it a bit here. So we had end users involved at every stage. We also had a steering group of adolescents who were the same people who would guide us through critical decisions. And we had a group of stakeholders, people involved in education, in sports at school, a youth chat line, all kinds of various disciplines, various ways of which they were involved with adolescents and healthy lifestyles or mental health, who helped us with the decisions in the project. The first phase in the participatory design was contextual inquiry, means that we try to understand what are their motivators, their barriers for these healthy lifestyles. And we started with an analysis of the chats that are received by a youth hotline to find themes, what are the kind of questions that adolescents have. We also had focus groups with end users that showed us that if they're motivated to work on healthy lifestyles, it's mostly because they're concerned about their body image, about their energy level, their fitness level, and barriers, as we well know from literature, are not having enough time, being tired, facing bad weather. And kind of expectations they had for the app was that it would be something where they could self-monitor, where there's achievement to things, so things that they can achieve in the app, and there's also kind of a ranking, social rankings. And these kind of informations were added or were taken into account in the next phase, where we looked at what is it exactly more specifically what they would expect. So we had another set of focus groups and stakeholder consultations. And so the adolescents said, well, we want an app that allows us to monitor, but also has rewards and tips where we get tailored suggestions. It's got to be fun. We need to have some competition. We'd like to have the possibility to share what we're doing on social media. And it needs to have bright and happy colors. And so we integrated most of that, with the exception of social media sharing and the competition, which was opposed by the stakeholders because they felt that this would be too difficult for vulnerable youth, people who might not perform that well when they're sharing on social media. They may actually get negative remarks. Competition might actually also be demotivating for the ones who are not at the top of the leaderboard. So these were things that they wanted us not to include. Then we had a prototype that was tested in the pilot study and also in the mock-ups. And we found that a third, even though they were included in the study, did not use the app. They simply forgot. They said they had no interest. They only used part of the intervention, such as the Fitbit, which was there to self-monitor. But about half of them said, well, we really like the app. And as they had few suggestions for improvement, we moved forward. Again, the stakeholders had some further suggestions for more vulnerable subpopulations, such as those with dyslexia, and making sure that everybody could read everything that was in there. And so as a last phase in this participatory design, we evaluated the effects. We conducted a cluster randomized trial. And so the adolescents were randomized at school level. Important to know was that this was actually an intervention that was not running at school. because when we designed the project, we immediately already envisioned how would it be maintained, how would it be sustained afterwards. And we had a partner who said, we are willing to continue with this. And this was the Flemish Organization of Health Promotion. And so their intention for the tool was to make it available on their website. And so it had to be developed in a way that they could also maintain it afterwards. So without the participation of the school, without the school structure, it had to be something that the adolescents could use in their leisure time individually. So that's how it was also envisioned. But we did recruit the kids via school because that's the best way to have a good representation of academic track, non-academic track, for example, in vocational schools and so on. So they were recruited at school level. It was a 12-week intervention. There was an intermittent measurement as well, and we had a process evaluation at the end. I will not talk much about the chatbot in this. We'll focus mostly on the mini-series and the app, but those who are interested in the chatbot and on how it was developed, there's a very elaborate paper on the development on the chatbot. So what was it based on? What is like the theoretical foundation of our intervention? As I said, it was a self-regulation app. So it was based on the health action process approach and including several of these techniques that can enhance the predictors of translation from intention to behavior. So a crucial element was setting goals in terms of adolescent lingo. That was called setting missions. They wanted to, goals was not something that they wanted to use. They said, well, we'll call it a mission. So they could set a mission, and we have an example here. Unfortunately, it's in Dutch. But so these are the 4 behaviors. What do you want to do? I choose to move more, sleep more, sit less, have a daily breakfast. If, for example, move more was selected, great, you want to move more, what will you do? Active transport, sport, or something else. So there were some predefined choices, but they could also always enter something of their own choice. Okay, you choose active transport. Where to? To school, to my hobby, and so on. And then, okay, how are you going to do this? And so they could select these things. They could always also enter their own choice. And whenever this was selected, it was entered into their agenda. And so the agenda helped to create specific actions and also served as a reminder showing that, okay, today this is what I have planned to do. Coping planning was included in the tools, so they could anticipate certain barriers and how to address these. Graphs was where we had the self-monitoring, and for the activity behaviors and sleep, it drew these from the Fitbit. For breakfast, it was a diary. They had to click every day if they had taken breakfast or not. And so they could actually follow the progress of their behaviors. We have the gamification aspect here, so they could actually earn coins for extra challenges that they could take, and the extra challenges were always related to the health behaviors. And with the coins or the rewards that they had collected, they could pimp their avatar. They could get accessories for their avatar. Tips and tricks included information if they wanted to get certain suggestions or more background knowledge, and also had links to health organizations. So for example, if someone, it was important for the funding agency and also for the stakeholders that if someone did have a question on mental health, which is not something that they would find in the app, but they could find the right person to contact to talk to. So these kind of organizations were also included in the tips and tricks. They could click on the chatbot if they wanted to chat. It was an automated chatbot. And if they clicked on hashtag live goals with the camera, they could watch an episode. The episode of our mini-series, one was available each week. So it was kind of like unlocking the next episode. This is where we come to the second theory that was guiding this intervention. So apart from the ones who are motivated, have an intention to perform these health behaviors, we also assumed that there would be adolescents who had very little motivation for the health message that was in there. And so drawing from the Elaboration Likelihood Model, we designed these mini-series. So what is the hypothesis of this model? It says, okay, if you're motivated to process whatever message that is in there because it's personally relevant for you, because it's something that you like to master information and so on, and you're at that time, you're able to process the information, you will go to a very rational form of cognitive processing, looking at all the arguments, and this might lead to an attitude change. However, if you're not motivated because you don't care, or because you're not able at that time, you're distracted, you have other things on your mind, you're tired, it doesn't mean that you're not processing the information at all. You might still be processing the information, but you're processing it mainly on peripheral cues, which means maybe the attractiveness of someone who's presenting the message or the message itself, the credibility, what kind of power it is conveying, if it's reaching me via a channel that I know very well. And so based on these peripheral cues, you might still get some kind of more change in attitude, and based on this kind of more temporary, weaker attitude change, you might then be more open to also have a cognitive processing of the arguments. And this Elaboration Likelihood Model has been applied to narrative persuasion. So if we use a storyline to have the attractiveness, the credibility, and so on conveyed in these messages, how can we do this? And so this extended Elaboration Likelihood Model states that for storylines or narratives to have this kind of impact on the peripheral attitude shift, there are certain conditions. Your storyline needs to be appealing. It needs to speak to your target group. So how did we try to achieve this? We had the script written by young script writers. Actually, they had just graduated from college. And we also used the input from our steering group to create a storyline that would appeal to young people. The quality of production needs to be sufficiently high to have enough of this immersion, absorption, and have the rest of the effects that you might have in this model. So we involved a film school and a cinematographer to make sure that the quality of the video and the audio was sufficiently high. Important is that what you're trying to change, your persuasive content, needs to be included in an unobtrusive way. It cannot be overly obvious that you're trying to change their health attitudes. If you think of like a daily drama, I'm not sure, I think you have Good Times, Bad Times, something like this in France. No? There's some series that I think you have the same in Germany. You think of these soap series that you see every day on TV, and sometimes they actually include a societal relevant topic, or they make one of their characters transgender, someone who has cancer, someone who is going through a difficult time, has mental health problems, for example. These things are not just in there without preparation. These are well researched. They often use the help of organizations that are specialized in this to make sure that it is conveying the right message. But it's never overly clear that you should get screened for breast cancer, you should do this. No, you're seeing what the character is going through, their personal experiences, and it is in this way, because of the identification with the character and the empathy, creating some identification and awareness. So this was important also here in our small series. So we focused on the daily experiences, friendship, romances of these young people, and the healthy lifestyles were woven into the story in a bit of a hidden way. And they need to be able to identify with the characters. So we had both ethnically and gender diverse characters, main characters, and the actors were recruited from a high school, from where people learn acting at high school, and so they were recruited from the target group. All the episodes are available here, but they're in Dutch. So I'm showing some stills here. Here's one of the characters who wakes up in the morning. His parents are already at work. He goes to the fridge, planning to have breakfast. He looks in the fridge. He sees there's nearly nothing in the fridge. So he finds a note on the table saying, well, you know, we're off to work and we have to work until late at night. Here's €5 and buy something. So he goes to school without having had breakfast. He hangs out with his friends, and then they have PE later that day, and they have to do, I don't know, a Cooper test or a run, and he actually doesn't have the energy because he hasn't had breakfast, and you see him sitting next to a tree because his energy is low. So you see, it's not focused on the healthy lifestyles, but the healthy lifestyles are in there. So what did we find with all our efforts on user involvement, the narrative, the chatbot to increase user engagement? A very sobering experience, because even though the intervention was intended to be used for 12 weeks, after 10 days, most of them discontinued, half of them discontinued the use. We saw that 30% only opened the app on the day that it was installed, and that 44% stopped already in the first week. What were reasons? So when we noticed that they hadn't used any of the components in the intervention for 3 weeks, they would get a call. We would ask them why. And so what did they say? It didn't really help me much. It didn't change my behavior. I didn't really see what it could do for me. I just don't like it. I don't see any added value compared to what else already exists. I already have a very healthy lifestyle, which we knew was not the case, because 90% of the adolescents in the survey didn't meet the recommendations for the health behaviors that were included. I'm not encouraged by my friends or my family to actually use this intervention. What we did see, well, the usage of all the components was very low per week, but if the ones who used the app and the narratives longer or more in the first week also continued, the adherence of these people was higher also throughout the intervention. So if we can manage to make a strong impression of these components at the beginning, we're also able to maintain their engagement for longer. I will go very quickly over this just for the sake of time. These are some self-reported perceptions of the ones who did use the intervention, so not the attrition analysis of the ones who had dropped out, but the ones who actually had used the full intervention for at least 20 minutes. And they said, well, what I liked the best was the gamification, the coins. That was the most fun part. And the action planning helped me. So the perceived helpfulness was highest for action planning. The chatbot, the feelings were mixed because they liked it, but the chatbot also had limitations. They mostly wanted to start with small talk or tell me a joke, that kind of stuff. And the chatbot couldn't always reply to this. And when it came to the narrative, our mini-series, often they forgot about it. They forgot that it was there. And so this is those who did use it said it was very encouraging. It was an incentive. I was looking forward to the next episode, and it helped me know how to do this behavior. So it also modeled the behavior. On the whole, they liked the fact that it gave them choices, but they also said, well, we're using it if everyone among my friends is using it, because then we're talking about it. How many coins did you get? What kind of progress did you make? And so this was something that we didn't include actively, the social element, because of the way that it would be implemented. But it's clear that for adolescents, this is an important part. So to conclude, we had, for this case, low user engagement despite all our efforts. The app and the narrative can increase retention, but only if the initial engagement, the first impression, can be boosted for these components. We should definitely include more social proliferation features, so features that allow kids to talk about it, that it becomes something that is alive in their social group outside of the use of the intervention. And another thing is that our pre-intentional determinants were mostly included in the narrative, so for the peripheral attitude shift, but there were very few BCTs to actually boost pre-intentional determinants in the other parts. So after the peripheral attitude change, you would expect to have more of the cognitive processing and the arguments, and the tips and tricks may not have been enough for that, and we might have needed more BCTs to actually also boost the intention. Moving on to another case. How am I on time? Ça va? Okay. Moving on to another project that we ran around the same time was the Smart Life project, which was a 2-year European project. It was an innovation application, means that we are doing this not just to gain insight, but actually this was a collaboration with SMEs. So the plan was to actually have something that could be brought out on the market. We collaborated with a gaming company from Germany and a business from Portugal and a university from Spain. And again, most of the insights are thanks to the PhD student who worked on this, Ayla Schwartz, who is now a lecturer at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. And so what was the plan for Smart Life? It was to create an exergame, but we know with certain exergames that they very quickly become boring because there's no challenge in it that continues. There's no narrative. It's always the same. That is one of the challenges of exergames. The other thing is that with certain exergames, you can actually cheat. If you think of the Wii Fit that we used to have, you could have like certain wrist flicks, and then it would count as being physically active, even though actually people weren't really doing anything. And so what we wanted to create was a mobile exergame with a narrative so that we could keep the user engagement, and also have an exergame that is tailored by what they are doing at that time. So your physical activity is measured in an accelerometer. This is feeding the challenge in your game so that you're constantly in this, what do you call it, kind of moment of flow. What does flow mean? That you have an optimal balance between what you're able to do and what is also challenging. So you're avoiding frustration because it's too difficult. You're also avoiding boredom because it's too easy. So if the accelerometer monitored the physical activity, if physical activity was too low, for example, the challenge would become a bit harder, the music would become a bit faster, the tension would start to build. If you had been in a high level of physical activity for a while, it might actually slow down a bit. So it was trying to keep you in this optimal balance of flow. How did we measure this? So we had a tiny accelerometer that was in a t-shirt. The ID for the t-shirt actually at the end appeared to be redundant. We could have just used a tracker, but it was one of the business IDs that if we could have a smart shirt that could be personalized, this could actually add to the business model for the company. If it becomes like, cool, I'm a level black, I'm a level pink, so on, and you could have certain characters of the game printed on your shirt, it could add to the attraction for the adolescents. And so we had other theories that were in there too. The MDA framework is something that is used a lot in gaming development. It looks at what are the movements that gamers have to make, what are the aesthetics that you need to have, what are the practical tools that you need, and the self-determination theory, which was also a model that was easy to communicate in between health psychologists or behavior change professionals and gaming professionals, because it was a model they were familiar with. And so how did we, again, we used quite an elaborate participatory design of the game. First, we wanted to work on the narrative. So we asked nearly 500 adolescents as part of a survey, if you were to create your own game, what would it be about? Who would be in it? Where would it take place? What would the challenges be? And based on the coding, the qualitative coding of what they said, it was clear they had a preference for human characters rather than fantastical beasts, for example, fantasy characters. They liked big urban settings, New York, London, those kind of big cities. They liked catastrophes and a dark, mysterious mood. So these were the kind of themes that came up across gender, across vocational, academic track schools, and so on. So in various groups, these were the preferences that we found. Based on these preferences, the gaming company made some visuals. They used this to create some narratives that were presented. They had different art styles that they presented, so 19 different art styles, also different settings. And so all of these were presented to a small group of adolescents, and they were asked, what do you think, what do you prefer, and so on. One of the ideas they had was a delivery game, where the person has to, this was at a time when the Deliveroo guys were quite popular, and this was one idea. They had to deliver parcels, and of course you have to be physically active to move it everywhere. A second idea was a medieval game and a castle and so on. And they felt that both of these were too childish. They didn't really like it. They preferred the post-apocalyptic setting with the catastrophe, as long as the game could combine fantasy and reality. They did not want to see any zombies. So based on this input, we created the narrative, and this is shown on the right here. So some catastrophe has taken place, and the world is contaminated, and you think you're the only survivor, and you're in a bunker, and in this bunker you are safe. You can go out where it's contaminated when you have your protective suit on, but for your suit to be protective, you need to charge it. And so you need to do physical activity to charge your suit to be able to go out. There's all kinds of challenges that they have to do on the way, so they get certain tips on what they have to do. As time goes on, they discover they're not the only one in the game, and that there's other islands where there are survivors, and they can actually work together. And in the end, they're supposed to find the place that is together, that is not contaminated, where they can live happily ever after. Apart from the narrative, we also did a contextual inquiry looking at how would they play it, how could they integrate this in their daily life. So they told us that it had to be something they could use both indoors and outdoors. If they were bored at home, that they could play the game. So it wouldn't, if it was only running as an activity, this would be something they could not do indoors. So it would have to have a variety of things that they could do indoors and outdoors. We thought about sending them to specific places and using GPS, but they didn't like that because they said, well, you know, certain places I'm not allowed to go from my parents because it's not safe. There are certain parks where there's criminality and I'm not allowed to go there. So we want to choose our own locations, no specific target locations. They wanted leaderboards, again, social aspect important, and we also included this by having something that they could unlock, where when they discover there are other players that they can work with and they can ask for help. They also said when would they be able to play this not at school, because certain schools have limitations on using their phone at school. And also using the internet connection. And so they said, well, probably I would play it when I'm bored going to school or coming back from school. So as kind of a commuting tool, and which is something that was on average quite short, like 10 minutes. So we had to make sure that they could complete a mission within these 10 minutes to not build up frustration. You get to school, you haven't even completed your mission yet. That was not something that we wanted to have. We also had prototype testing, and they gave it an 8 out of 10. Now, what did we find in our results on engagement? We again had a cluster RCT in schools, and again the game was played mostly outside of school. This was what the adolescents had given as preference. There were 3 arms. There was the condition that was a passive control condition, not shown here. And then we have 2 intervention conditions, one with the game, but no accelerometer, so not driven by what is measured, and one where it's dynamically tailored, where the challenge adapts to what is measured in the by the accelerometer. So our assumption was that actually our dynamically tailored group would find the game much more engaging than the one where it was not tailored, and overall we found nearly no differences, with the exception on really feeling like you're part of the narrative. The experience of the storyline was stronger in the dynamically tailored group than in the one that was not tailored. But we also found a difference on the median play duration, where it was a negative effect because the group that was not using the shirt played it longer than the group that did play with the shirt and the accelerometer. And looking at the comments, we saw that they found it quite burdensome, having to put on the shirt, having to synchronize before they could start the game. And so in this group, they could just start up the app and go. And so this might have explained that we actually had a negative effect, and where not using the shirt, but using a simple tracker might have been more effective. Overall, even so across the 2 groups, the play duration was very low. We had, I think, game time for like 4.5 hours of game in total, and they played it between 8 minutes to 25 minutes on average. So not a lot of the game was used. When we then looked at the comments that they gave, what their impressions were of the game, well, they felt that it was too slow, too boring. They wanted more variety, but also they wanted to change the graphics. They said it was too dark. It was too, so remember that they said they wanted to have a catastrophe, something dark and mysterious, but at the same time, in one of the focus groups, they did say, we want something bright. So our game developers assumed, well, post-apocalyptic, it's gonna look gloomy, whereas actually they wanted something that was a catastrophe, but not too dark, not too gloomy. And if we'd had different colors, maybe we would have been able to keep more of the initial users. So to conclude from this part, double check your assumptions. It's not because they say for one part we want a catastrophe that this has immediately implies that this is the visuals that we should create. We should really double check everything that is associated with this. It showed the importance, again, of initial user engagement. We're often focusing on, oh, we're losing so many people after 2 months, after 3 months. But in these both cases, we see that it's the initial user engagement, the first impressions, where we have a problem. And we would also recommend more live testing. For example, we had a lot of focus groups, a lot of talking about the tool, but not a lot of, here it is, try it out, and we'll come and take it back after 2 weeks and see how it went. And if we had done that, maybe we would have discovered the problem with the colors before we started testing the efficacy. And this is actually in commercial companies, technology companies, something that is often done. They use a Scrum method. They have an ID. They immediately test it. They continue to develop it. 2-3 weeks later, they have the next phase. And so at every step, something is tested live instead of developing a lot and having at certain phases some testing. So much more continuous live testing. If I have time, I have one more slide. Sarah? Yeah. I briefly want to mention the work of a colleague at the University of Antwerp, who is doing her PhD on the use of humor in physical activity promotion. And so what is the idea here is that cognitive fatigue, so if we're saying, well, we don't want to do any kind of sports because we feel too tired, or no physical activity because we feel too tired, it's not always because we are tired physically and that we have muscle fatigue. Often it's cognitive fatigue, where we have been working on computer all day and we are just mentally exhausted. And so her assumption is that, based on literature, is that actually humor can help relieve this cognitive fatigue, which is a barrier for physical activity, because it increases positive mood, positive affect. And so she tested in 3 conditions. What if we send people like humorous reminders or humorous prompts to be physically active compared to just non-humorous prompts? And what if we vary them? Because, you know, if you know that whatever you're going to get is humorous, maybe you lose the element of surprise. Whereas if sometimes you get the non-humorous and sometimes you get the humorous might have more of an impact. So this was a 7-day intervention. She used a Fitbit to measure physical activity, and there was a 1-week warm-up period to make sure that we wouldn't have a peak in physical activity from the self-monitoring. Notifications were disabled. Her target population were women, only women, because she wanted to have more of a homogeneous group, not because she didn't think that it wouldn't work in men. And in a screener questionnaire, they were asked if they were sitting more than at least 50% of the time in their job, and if they met 150 minutes of MVPA, and if that was not the case, they were eligible for inclusion. So the prompts were sent in an application that was created specifically for the intervention, and this tool, this application, also measured the cognitive fatigue at that time at 3 times of the day. The materials were elaborately pre-tested to make sure that the majority of people would find them humorous. So they had a first set of materials that they tested. They selected the best scoring humorous images. Then they also tested the app to see if it was usable. And then they had a second pre-test on the messages. And they found that the humorous messages were more effective, but only if the person at that time experienced cognitive fatigue. So there was not a main effect of the humor versus the non-humor. It was only if at that time they experienced cognitive fatigue. And so that's where I want to conclude overall for my talk. I think we need a stronger focus on initial user engagement, because it is possible that if people discontinue after a time, as we heard in the previous talk, that it is a matter of effective engagement. They've learned everything they need to know from the app. But if the majority isn't using it, even for 1 week, we may not expect any effects. There are some entertainment features that look like they are promising, but they need to become more visible, and we need to maybe promote them a bit more in the tool. Social features we should probably use more, and this both examples where we saw this were for adolescents, so this may also apply to adults, but certainly for adolescents. We need to maybe consider what kind of techniques or features to fit with how people feel at the time, and this is something we also see in just-in-time adaptive tools. So what do we present at what time, in which context people are. And lastly, I think there are certain insights we get here where we see, okay, this tool has some potential, can do something, but it's not there yet. And as Nikos also said, the problem is often you then come to the end of your project, and that's a dead end for the tool, whereas we need to find ways to continue to reuse these tools, to adapt them so that we can actually learn more and improve on them. Thank you.
Much. And are there any questions? Yes.
Thank you, Anne, for a very interesting talk. I just wanted to ask you more about user engagement. In one of your projects, you said there was disagreement between what the users wanted and what the stakeholders suggested. You mentioned competition and social media. So how do you reconcile these conflicts? Do you always go with the opinion of the stakeholders? Have you got any other examples where you try to kind of reach middle ground, some of the other work you've done?
Yeah, that's a tricky thing indeed. So we did, for example, the social media sharing the competition they didn't want to have. In this case, because the tool was not intended to be played in a social setting, we followed their advice, but it turns out that I think we probably should not have, and we probably need to have more. So I think one of the issues here was that our groups were separate. We had a user steering group that was separate from the stakeholder group. If you think of a real co-creation and participatory development, you would mix those groups. And then I think instead of us trying to find the consensus between the two, you hopefully would get stakeholders who are motivated, who listen to what the users have to say. As it turned out, I think the stakeholders were concerned about a small group of vulnerable people where we might have these problems, whereas the majority, with the choice that we made, we may have protected a small group but missed out on something that could have been beneficial for a much larger group. So I think if I would do this again, I would create mixed groups and really try to find a compromise in the working of the co-creation group, rather than having a separate user group and a separate stakeholder group, to avoid having to, meet one of the, two. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions?
Many thanks for your talk. Sorry if I missed that, but the chatbot in the first study was just about there is no narratives on the chatbot specifically, and no gamified incentives as well. Do you think it could be interesting to set the chatbot at to be the cornerstone of the intervention, or maybe it's more important to focus on other features?
Yeah. So the chatbot actually did send 3 times a week a little notification, and could be used. It was an automated chatbot, so they could ask questions to the chatbot. I think if the chatbot could be continued to be developed and could be a technically strong tool, then I think it might be interesting to integrate everything in the chatbot, but that was not the case. So having a chatbot that functions well means that you need to have a very large database of all kinds of questions that users can ask. So the way that it was not a pre-selected format. So, sometimes with chatbots, if you think of websites where you're going to buy something, you see this pop-up, do you have a question? And then you have like a choice menu, what question do you have? This was not how it was set up. It was open questions. People could type in whatever they wanted. And so for the chatbot to be able to respond accurately, it needs a large database of all kinds of questions that people might have, so that it can recognize, okay, this is the question, these are the words, this is how I should reply. And it requires much more continued development to, so we actually saw with the chatbot that once the chatbot did not give an accurate answer, they gave up. And so then you would risk that they give up on everything maybe. So I think if we look at what we had, probably the app, which was already developed on the backbone of previous apps, was probably technically the strongest component, and the other two were kind of new things for us. So I would recommend using your core component as the thing that you technically trust the most, where you will lose the least users because of technical difficulties. But if our chatbot would be technically strong, I think it might be something that could be a good interaction platform for the rest of the intervention.
Thank you. Other question?
Thank you very much. Regarding the study one, so adolescents are expected to develop their self-regulation toolbox, copying, planning, self-monitoring. Do you think that they learned to do it? And if not, how can we ensure that without the app, they will still be able to do so?
Yeah, well, we hope so, but we didn't measure it. We didn't have like a follow-up on, so you hope when you have a tool where they're actually learning these self-regulatory skills, rather than us saying, well, you know, this is what we suggest, that this is a skill that they would learn that could also transfer to other issues they may have, other kind of health behaviors, but we didn't measure outcomes on this. But I think it's definitely what we would hope for, and definitely worthwhile to measure. As usual, we're kind of limited with the time that we have in the project. So the RCT was run during COVID. That was a complicating factor, and then the time kind of was up. So I think it would be interesting to see, maybe if you have a study where you don't have such a long development phase, you can start with something that is already there, and you can immediately test it, and then test longer term effects, or also test for effects on other kind of issues than the ones that you are focusing on. Yeah.
In the same vein of this question, do you think that PE teacher in the school could have a role in the use of this app or this device? They can use it, or do you think it is a controlling strategy maybe for adolescents, or do you think they can support the use of this device and so generalize or have a more impact on adolescents?
I absolutely believe that this is the way to go. I think we're looking too often at standalone digital interventions, because we're thinking, well, that's the strength of digital tools. They have a higher reach and so on. People can use them whenever they want. But especially for adolescents, I think we see that if the supportive context is not there, they just won't use it. So I would definitely think that having it embedded in the school context could have created a higher impact, and maybe not necessarily only in PE class, because we had several health behaviors included. But yeah, I think also that, well, I'm not sure how PE teachers would think about using a game in their class. In this case, the hashtag life goals did not focus on MPPA, for example, or on certain duration, because we looked at the health behaviors in relation to mental health. And so for mental health, it seems that you mostly have to enjoy what you're doing. And it's not the recommendations that we have, the WHO recommendations for physical activity are based on physical health and not on mental health, and so there's not always the same relation. So PE teachers might find that, setting your own goals during class, maybe they might find it too soft, not fitting their learning goals. But if it could complement it and they could actually encourage it in between PE class, I think that would definitely be a good strategy. Yeah, and I think we definitely need to use the school context more. Yeah.
In the same vein, I was wondering if the HAPA model is the most adapted to adolescents. And given that you mentioned that the influence of peers was important, maybe it could be relevant to base the app development on theories like social identity theories or group cohesion theories.
Yeah, I think it had its value because when we listen to the adolescents and ask them what helped you the most or what did you like the most, they said that the action planning was what helped them the most. So I think the HAPA model definitely had a value also for adolescents. But I agree that it could be complemented with theories that focus more on this social aspect. And indeed, maybe not only on like social norm, but on social identity and how to kind of activate certain identities depending on the context that you're in. Yeah.
Other questions?
Thank you very much, Anne, for this very interesting presentation. You, at least the first two projects that you presented are targeting at adolescents. Which from my point of view is a very courageous choice because it's not an easy target. But my question was that you define adolescent as ranging from 12 years old to 25, which is quite a big range. So did you see some differences between some group within some group ages?
Yeah. They're actually not from 12 to 25 because then indeed we would also have the young adults. Let me just go back. It's from 12 to 15.
Oh, to 15, okay.
Yeah.
Because there are some papers saying that people cognitively are adolescent until 25. Okay.
Yeah, and the reason why we focused on 12 to 15-year-olds was mostly based on the mental health outcome, because research has shown that half of the mental health problems occur around this age, and we wanted to make it a kind of a promotion, so not a treatment tool or not for at-risk adolescents, but more of a primary prevention or promotion tool to kind of improve how can we prevent these problems from occurring? How can we promote their mental health? So that's why we focused on this age group. And I think with any kind of visuals that you create, even not just like BCTs and cognitive abilities, but just if you include narratives, if you include visuals, and you have a much broader age range, I think it becomes very difficult because what is attractive to a 12 to 15-year-old will not be attractive to a 16 to 18-year-old. And so for certain of these things, often a younger group will look up to a bit of an older group. So if you create material for 16-year-olds, you might probably still be attractive for a 13-year-old because they look up to this. But this was something in our game against cyberbullying that we discovered, which was targeted at 13 to 14-year-olds because that's where cyberbullying peaks. And we had characters that were like 18 to 19-year-olds, and very quickly they said, we don't identify with these. They have breasts, they have facial hair for the men, and if you look at the body of a 12-year-old, that's just not how they look. So we had to. So I think creating visuals that are attractive for a broad group, I think, is a real challenge. So having a narrow focus really helps. Yeah.
If I may, I would like to ask another question. Okay. Most of your intervention are based on entertainment or even humor. For the last one, you mentioned flow, which is a dealing with I would say, enjoyment, maybe pleasure. I would like to know to which extent pleasure played a role in the engagement and efficacy of both or some of the examples that you've presented?
Well, I think it unfortunately it didn't, because the engagement was too low to actually drive efficacy. I think we, especially if you see how little they used it, we didn't even get to the part of the enjoyment. It was first impressions, that first look, is this something that looks exciting? We didn't get, for most of them, we didn't get past that phase, whereas enjoyment and fun is the experience while you're using it. And so we would need to continue to develop this, to improve it, and to see, okay, now we've gotten to the next phase, now we can see how enjoyment plays a role. But if you look at engagement literature, it's always a combination. If it's fun, but you feel like it doesn't help you, you probably will drop out as well. So it's, yeah, multi-dimensional. We need to have a whole bunch of things for engagement to drive efficacy.
And to find the right balance.
Yes, yes.
Thank you. Clément, are there any questions online?
I have questions. So the first question is from Romain Debru. So in the last project you presented, did you detect an effect between the initial level of sedentary behaviors and the response to the message?
Can you repeat?
Yeah.
If there were any relations between initial sedentary behavior?
Yeah, and the response to the message.
I'm trying to go to the...
Yeah, take your time. We have time.
It's not exactly... Let me just go. The outcome that was measured was not sedentary behavior, but was steps taken, walking. That's what the intervention focused on. I'm not sure that sedentary behavior was measured. I'd have to check with the PhD student who did this intervention. I was not involved in this intervention, unfortunately, because I think it's a really cool study. It was one of the studies of my colleagues. But I know that baseline physical activity or baseline steps was taken into account as a, yeah.
So we can say to Roman to ask you direct an email to that. Okay. Another one from Guillaume Chauvins. Thank you a lot, Anne. What would be a realistic and good outcomes in terms of engagement for these interventions? And there is other part of the question, but first I can...
So is the question like how to measure engagement, or is it what do we strive for? I'm guessing it's maybe the second, like what would we have liked to see? Well, I think the result that Nico's got of 50% of people who continue to use it for as long as we intended, we would have loved to get that. I think that was something that we, in terms of engagement, for the exergame, we were hoping to get more engagement than what we saw in what was available, and actually we got less. So that's not the outcome that we want to achieve. You will, I think you will never have 100% engagement, but yeah, I think that would have been quite a nice outcome. Yeah.
Okay. Guillaume is saying me that I can ask you all the questions together because they are complementary, so I will do that. So how long can we expect to have someone actively engage in such interventions? Should we plan the end of engagement from the beginning of the intervention as something that will necessarily happen at some point?
Can you repeat the last bit?
Should we plan the end of the engagement from the beginning of the intervention as something that will necessarily happen at some point?
So I'm not sure how the person asking the question means plan for the end of engagement. I don't know if they mean
Anticipate.
to say, like, should we tell people when you've reached this, it's okay, you don't need to continue? Or is it we should integrate other techniques, or not exactly sure how to understand maybe someone can help me out? Is anyone who's got a better understanding of the question?
You should consider when designing the app that after a few days, weeks, there's going to be this drop-out and engagement. So how you can maintain this engagement.
Well, and that's what I think the entertainment features should be boosted more to get this initial engagement, because we're talking about, they will drop out after maybe 6 months, but what we see here is that, well, we've lost most of them already at the beginning. So if we in the first study we saw that the narrative and the app, if they were used, most continue to use. So if we can actually better understand these features and what appealed in these features to these people, and kind of make this more visible and boost this more to the whole group, then this could be a way to avoid attrition. Not sure if that's.
I don't know, but I think this is a part of the other response of the answer. So. And to be more precise, I think that one point that Guillaume said is about this intervention are not developed to last forever. So how we manage that?
Yes. So indeed, we also don't want them to use them forever. We hope, related to the other question, that if they use them for 3 months, the 12 weeks that are intended, that they have learned enough to actually continue to apply it, and maybe also apply it to other issues in their life. So there's no issue, I think, in dealing with this when it comes to the end of the use of the tool. And I think maybe an interesting thing could also be, do we see an interesting point for research? Do we see that people at some points go back to these tools? Like, okay, I'm managed now, but I've had some sort of relapse, or I'm experiencing different difficult situations, like maybe what I had in my coping planning when it was in December are different from the problems I'm experiencing in June. And even though I haven't used it for 3 months because I was managing, or 4 months because I was managing well, at some point my needs are different and I might go back to this tool. I think that would be also something that we could strive for in the future. But at this time we're not there, because they're not even using it for more than 10 days. So hopefully we can redesign it at some point to make them use it for as long as necessary. They're fine to discontinue if they have a new need for them to go back to it. Yeah.
Okay, it was the last one.
Okay, thank you very much again.
Thanks again.
Okay, last question, Philippe.
Thank you very much, and for your presentation. I'm very impressed by the 3 programs you presented. I have a question about the first program. I was wondering if it's not too ambitious to focus on 4 health behavior at the same time, and I wonder if this lead to a sense of control for adolescents.
Yeah.
And also, some works show that health is not a big issue for adolescents.
What is not?
It's not a big issue, a big problem for
Yes.
health.
Yes.
Health.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's good entry to focus to develop an application focus on health, even if it is a mental health for adolescents.
Yeah. So concerning the first question on the 4 behaviors, they could actually choose. It wasn't that they had to work on the 4 behaviors. We gave them the 4 behaviors and they chose whatever they wanted to work on. And they actually appreciated that, to have that choice. So for example, if for one person physical activity and diet was not something that interested them, but sleep was, they would work on sleep. If they wanted to work on more than one, they could, but we know that that's not always, if you have too many goals at the same time, that doesn't always result in good efficacy. So they had the choice, but so they weren't working on 4 at the same time. And indeed, health is a far away thing for these young people. It's not always the best entry point, but at the same time, the stakeholders even already had problems with us saying that it was a healthy lifestyle tool and not communicating to the adolescents that our main outcome was mental health. They felt we were kind of cheating and we're not being honest and transparent to the adolescents. So I think if we would communicate this tool as kind of like, I don't know what we could make of it, because when they use it, they notice it is about health. So not sure what kind of message framing we could bring, maybe more on positive well-being, feeling happy. I'm not sure if that would, I'm not sure if that would change things, because then when you use the tool, you notice it is about health. And maybe if that's the case, we should focus more on the narrative and boost the narrative and boost more influencers and having more entertainment education that is not in an app. And I think indeed we should have included more pre-intentional BCTs because even though in the focus groups there was interest in health, well, we noticed that one of the reasons they didn't want to use the app was that they said, we think we're healthy enough already. So there was actually a lack much earlier in the process. Yeah, but yeah, using people who are not interested in health and increasing their awareness anyway, I think having these popular media, we use them in a narrative here, but we could have also used them in their more like their own daily life, try to include them in the series that they watch, work together with Netflix maybe, work together with some Instagram influencers who are not always promoting the healthy messages, to kind of increase awareness there. And I think that we don't always only have to look at our own digital tools. We can embed it and combine it with larger societal things actions that we have to take.